And to our dear audience, thank you for coming. Now, Jennifer, when we look at what I talked about, that growing energy demand in India, and like in any country, it poses a specific set of problems. And you know, there are issues with the transition around the world, but they're not the same in every country. Let's just have a look at what's happening in India, particularly when we look at balancing security, affordability, and decarbonisation, because we need to be doing all three.
That's right. And I think India, as we know, is one of the fastest growing economies. And so the challenge is you really can't be talking about decarbonisation without ensuring that you can tackle affordability. And it's all about addition here, and I think that's the right way to think about it. And I also think it's really important that we not get too fancy. You know, we talk about transitioning industry, and a lot of times that's throwing it away and starting over with some new way of making steel, for example. What we like to think about is how do you take that steel industry and decarbonize it and make it more efficient without displacing it. You can't just start over when you're growing at this rate.
And again, when we look at industries like steel, and particularly hard to abate industry, I mean, big industry is important to India. It's important to so many countries, yes, internally for domestic demand, but also for jobs and for economic growth and all of that. But when we look at the importance of the hard to abate industry, that's always the tough one, isn't it?
It is, but it's not as tough as we think if we think of steps.
Right.
The problem with the transition is sometimes people think that you've got this magic bullet.
Exactly. To go from A to Z, yes.
That just can't happen, and especially with new approaches and new technologies. If you remember, I remember actually the headlines in 2010 making fun of solar and saying that solar will never happen. I remember The Economist had a headline that said, solar will always be 10 years away. Well, guess what? Now, no matter where you turn, there's solar installation. The problem with new technology is it grows exponentially. Yes. So the first deployment is the most expensive. And then it takes years and years to get to the point where you're doubling at the right speed. You go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 16. You've got to get to that point. And the more you install, the cheaper it gets. So that's the other problem with the energy transition. Yes. We often ask ourselves the wrong question. Is it economically competitive? Well, maybe not today, but when? And that's the real question. Can it be economically competitive in 5 years, 10 years? And that's how I think we should measure new technologies and new approaches.
And solar, without a doubt, has proven that, I think, to everybody, even to the biggest skeptics that were out there who said it would never work. And I think we look around India, too, and we look at the amount of solar that's going into the grid. I mean, it's quite phenomenal here. And again, on beautiful days like this, there's plenty of sunshine, so, make the best of it. But talk to me, I suppose, about this cross-sector collaboration, because at the same time as developing on the renewable side, we have to keep pumping oil and gas. That has to happen. We can't let one go. And again, as you talked about that great transition, everybody was just going, we're heading to the promised land. It's green or go home. But no, very few, I think, countries looked at the plans and, as you call it, the steps along the way.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I truly believe in a future where electrons will be how we make molecules. Cheap electrons to convert CO2, to convert that carbon into molecules. So I think that is a key point that we need to remember, but that cannot happen until electrons get really, really cheap. When electrons get really, really cheap, what's going to happen is you're going to be able to activate a CO2 molecule. CO2 is very hard to activate, right? So you've got to zap the heck out of it, is the way I think about it, before you can get it to turn into something. Or you can add hydrogen. And I know everybody rolls their eyes today at the hydrogen economy, but I really believe it's the same as solar. As electrons get cheaper, hydrogen will get cheaper. And I think the other thing we have to do is be very careful, and this is why I don't like unicorns. If you are not willing to take steps, you're not going to get there. We are going to reduce the price of electrons. Fusion is beautiful, right? It's 40 years out. Why aren't we spending more money in reducing the cost of solar? How do we improve solar installations? How do we make panels flexible? How do we do all these things that people ignore because they're looking at the next shiny object, which today happens to be fusion? Nothing wrong with fusion. It's going to happen. But we need to take other steps to reduce the cost of electrons. That is critical and important.
And maybe I think in, the Russian euphoria of this great new clean green world, everybody is looking for the next big step whereby we do have to, work with what we have, with what we know. And actually, again, I think you're a great believer of making the best use out of what we have. There's many uses you can do that. But when we look at it, do you think we're kind of at that intersection, green electrons, biology, and advanced processes? So we put all of that together, and particularly, when we bring our friends AI into the equation here. I mean, AI's got to be the tool that's going to also really help drive this.
Yeah, so let me take a couple of steps back, because I talked about electrons, I talked about molecules, but what I haven't talked about is biology. So let's talk about biology.
Biology, yes.
Talk about AI. So I'm an old-fashioned thermochem girl. I spent my entire life doing thermal catalysis, so hardcore. But I do biology now, and the reason I do biology is because I'm chasing carbon. I'm chasing the last carbon atom, trying to make carbon go further. So we live in a world where we get used to talking about energy efficiency, but I want to talk about carbon efficiency. At the end of the day, that's what we need, to reuse every single carbon molecule. We cannot throw it away in trash. We cannot throw it away in our atmosphere. The problem with that, and I think everybody here, because of our oil background, knows that oil is the densest liquid known to man. So what does that mean? That means we push it around easily. It flows, but it's dense. And we can therefore build very large central locations where we refine petroleum, right? So what is a petroleum refinery? It's a massive number of steps, but you can handle that economics, that lack of selectivity, because you're processing 250,000, 300,000 barrels a day. So you can afford to break down the molecule into something else, and get all the products. Biology is completely different, right? Biology is the scalpel, whereas thermochem is the hammer.
Well,
you can selectively make a single product from many products, from many feedstock types, to one single product. And that is extremely important if you're going to process waste. The reason for that is waste is distributed. If you're going to push waste into a central location, it's going to cost you an immense amount of money. And you're going to have to clean it up. If you clean it up, it's not waste. So what that means is you have to take your processing facility to where the waste is, to where that carbon is. And to do that, you cannot afford to have 15 unit operations to get to the product you want. You can only have one unit operation. And so it becomes extremely important for you to leverage something like biology as opposed to leveraging thermochem. So biology is very important.
No, and I think that concept of, waste becoming a resource. I mean, I think we see that on small scale in many parts of the world, and we see it as innovation, but actually it is such a resource now because we have so much of it as well.
That's right. And so you have to imagine a world of distributed production. And what does that mean? That means you need AI. Actually, you need a lot of process control. If you're going to have basically little refineries everywhere, you're not going to have a bunch of engineers and operators and everything else at every site. So you have to think of it as the Tesla, right? What did Tesla used to do? They used to download software overnight to upgrade it. You didn't have to take it to the dealership.
Right. Yes.
You just uploaded it in every night. This is important. This is where process control becomes key. This is where AI can help you. You're processing massive amounts of data to be able to properly run a unit that's sitting in the field, sitting in a location where you usually wouldn't be operating. And then the last thing about biology, which most people maybe don't realize, is this is essential biology because of computing and the power of computing.
Yes, yes.
Okay? What we can do is we have a bacteria that takes carbon monoxide and makes ethanol, or carbon dioxide and hydrogen and makes ethanol. But maybe I wanted to make something else. Maybe I wanted to make caprolactam. The only way I can do that is if I re-engineer the pathway inside my bacteria. I have to change the enzymes. I have to change the pathway. You cannot do that through experimentation. Genetic modification of an organism, there are so many possible ways of doing something.
Right.
You can't win, and you need the most energy efficient pathway. And to do that, you need models. Models at the genomic level. If you can't do a model at a genomic level without massive amounts of computing, it's just too complicated.
And again, when we look at that, this is technology that's now available and is growing, exponentially. Bring it back to the India market here, because, a lot will work in different markets. And again, I think we have to, look at home here and see what works. And also, we've been talking about carbon capture and utilization for, I don't know, I've been talking about it for 30 years or something now. It almost seems to that, really its time has come. And, we're beginning to scale up. But if we can put that in the context of what's happening in India, how can it help this country maybe reduce imports and really maybe create its own domestic supply chains?
Yeah, so we have to go back to what we started at the beginning, right? You have to have carbon efficiency, which means carbon conservation. You cannot throw carbon away. And that's what reuse is, right? To me, it's quite a shame to say you're going to sequester carbon. You're going to take carbon and put it in a hole in the ground rather than making a new product out of it. To me, that's insane. That's wasteful.
And that's where it brings a lot of the problems and the objections and the community issues, and that's been part of the problem. But the fact now that you can use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is what we do. And I'll give you just an example. So we started by having a bacteria that can take carbon monoxide and convert it to ethanol. That ethanol we can convert to sustainable aviation fuel. That ethanol we can convert to materials. We actually have done this at commercial scale. We have over 300,000 tons of production capacity per year where we are taking a steel mill gas or ferroalloy mill gas and converting that to ethanol.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we bring that ethanol to India, and we have a partner, Indian Glycols, and they take that ethanol and they make MEG. Okay, so now you've made the monomer, and then we're able to convert that with partners that already take MEG to make polyester. Right. And so that polyester is actually, if you go to Athleta, they have polyester made from recycled emissions at a steel mill. If you go to REI, you can buy sweaters. If you go to Crabhoppers, you can buy jackets. Come to our booth. All of the products you'll see there that we show you are actually made from recycled carbon emissions. So CCU, utilization of carbon, that would have gone into the atmosphere as CO2 and particulate emissions is your jacket, is now your jacket. And you don't have to import that carbon to make products. And I think this is something that is increasingly important in a world where we need energy security and eventually energy independence. And at the same time, bonus points, you reduce carbon emissions.
I mean, we are really in that so blatantly and so clearly, recycling, reusing, repurposing, I mean, all of that. And it is, I think, very exciting in the CCU field at the moment where, there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 2 back sometimes, I think, But also let's look at the aviation fuel, the sustainable aviation fuel and the low carbon chemicals. I mean, how do you think they'll work here? And obviously you're already beginning to do this, but building partnerships here that will actually, deliver a business for an Indian client.
Absolutely. So we have 3 projects that I'll highlight. We've been working with Indian Oil where we're taking a PSA tail gas, a refinery tail gas, and converting that to ethanol. We are working with NTPC where we are taking CO2 plus green hydrogen at the Green Hydrogen Hub to make ethanol as well. Both of these will actually be intermediates for sustainable aviation fuel. And we just announced today a project with SED, which is a company that works with first generation ethanol equipment supply to integrate waste bagasse, so waste sugarcane byproduct, into their first generation ethanol production. So we're going to take the bagasse, we're going to gasify it with Anpur Scientific's gasifier, which is a local Indian gasification company, and then we're going to convert that to ethanol. This is actually a project that I think is really important. And the reason everything else I've talked about has been about taking our technology to an industrial location, steel refining, ferroalloy. This is actually a rural example.
Yes.
And the reason I like this example is because I want to create a different way of thinking about what the farmer can do or how they can benefit. Typically, what we tend to do with a rural economy is we take, right? We take and we take. And we do that even if it's a waste cellulose. And you say, okay, at least I'm paying him for something that he couldn't normally sell. But what I want to do then is an integrated solution. So for example, when we gasify, we get char. The char contains the ash, which contains the minerals. You take the char and the minerals and you give it back to the farmer. If you actually look at the impact of char, it's a lot like terra. People talk about Brazilian soil being so good.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So this is like terra. And so what that means is the farmer is now getting a better nutrient
in the soil.
And one of the nice things about that nutrient is it has the ability to trap water. So with less water, with less leakage of fertilizer, he will be able to grow his crops. And I think that's really important, right? Because we want to create an ecosystem that improves, not just one that takes. And so I'm really excited about that project. And I will tell you one last thing. Because there is so much interest right now in carbon credits, the carbon credits of these natural solutions are such that you might be able to benefit the farmer without making him pay more.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
I was just going to come on to that. I mean, who pays for this? We need to look at the policy that's in place. We need to look at, investors and, where should investors be putting their bets at the moment? Because I think there's so much going on, and that has just such a wonderful 360 approach to it, I think, because it benefits also a whole other industry, which is exciting too.
Absolutely. And I think future projects and technologies have to be able to solve multiple problems at once. Reduce the carbon intensity of the steel sector and improve the carbon intensity of aviation, right? But to your question, what should investors be investing?
And who's interested at the moment? You're already talking to many investors, so you know the types of people and the types of institutions that are thinking, I like this, this makes sense.
Sure. So we have a partnership with Brookfield that finances infrastructure projects. But I do think it's really important to focus not just on when you've built enough plants that infrastructure funds can come to it, but before that, how you build first of a kind. Who's going to finance first of a kind? Because they're not infrastructure yet. So I think it's important there for governments and blended finance to play an important role. And I think it's really great. If you look at India, for example, they have VGF, viability gap funding, which helps to finance scale up and first of a kind, and is not just financing what's being done in R&D. What should investors invest in? Everything. One solution is not going to solve our carbon problem, and it's not going to get us energy security. So I think they need to invest in a menu of solutions, and I think these solutions will be adaptable to specific countries. So I imagine a day where there is a large number of approaches. And the last thing I would say about this is we need to learn to rapidly prototype, right? We take so much time to get one technology out the door.
Yes.
That if it fails after you spend 25 years on it, you're going to start over, right? It's better to test and test and fail and test and get the few that are going to be successful, and then work to get those down the cost curve.
Because really, I mean, it's also a matter of speed at the moment. You know, our energy demand growth, and I think just our climate emissions, all of that, we're at an urgent crossroads. I mean, we have to do that now. Let's wrap this up, and again, look to the future a little bit. I mean, what's in this, you know, for India? How do you think it can actually help India to move forward? And, you know, when we look at that successful, I suppose, integrated energy model, do you see an appetite for it here? And you think that, you know, what can the industry do to move it forward?
Well, first of all, I was in Davos last week, and I don't think I ever heard the word decarbonisation, okay? And this morning, everybody on the stage knew that the Prime Minister and the Minister care about these things, and so they talked about them. And so there's a strong signal from India that we can grow while we reduce carbon intensity, and that we can create affordability while we reduce carbon intensity. That is a signal that you see only in India, and I would say China as well. You don't see it anywhere else. So India's ready. India's always been ready. Yeah. And what I have to say, when you look at Minister Puri, right? 5 years ago, he set out some ambitions, and India has exceeded every one of them. Every one of them. So India is moving like the wind. And I think it's time for us to recognize that this is going to be the powerhouse and the future of where energy innovation will happen.
Super. And what an optimistic note to close off on. I really want to thank you. And again, it's a great way to start our India Energy Week here, you know, to just see, I know you've heard a lot this morning about all of the great projects that are in place, about, you're going to hear much more about energy demand for the next few days and that, but really it's an exciting time in the industry, it's an exciting time in this country, and obviously an exciting time for all of the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and really for sharing the possibilities, I think, with us. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jennifer Holmgren. Thank you so much again, Jennifer.